Nations are attacking Israel on all fronts: land, sea, air, and spiritual wickedness in the heavens. China moving precipitously closer towards being the world's eminent superpower. The Russia-Ukraine war is now impacting the entire globe. Alliances are forming more closely, dividing the East from the West. Could this be the early stages of Daniel's 2 legs of iron and 10 toes or kingdoms? Pressure on the church to conform to the left's standards of morality rather than biblical truths. Join us for this and so much more in Modern Headlines Meets Bible Prophecy, Spring 2023. Hello, everybody. My name is Mark. You're watching and or listening to the Russick Outlook. Thank you so much for joining. Today's topic, Modern Headlines Meets Bible Prophecy, Spring 2023. Generally, I record these and put these out on a monthly basis. I apologize for the delay. I've not been on my regular schedule of producing videos and on different topics. Unfortunately, my oldest brother passed away a little over a month ago, and much of the family's time and our time was spent prior to, where a few weeks before, leading up to his death in the hospital, and then afterwards. At some point down the road, I hope to talk about that a little bit more because there were eternal circumstances, as they are with anyone who passes from the earth. But that's for another time. So on that note, I decided, let me just look at the last couple of months. So I've put together what I feel is some relevant information. And since I have been away for a little bit, I just wanted to elaborate again why I do this from the Modern Headlines perspective. And you know, when I look at the situation of where the world is today, and specifically the timing of everything, and everything is falling in line with what the Bible laid out. So I wanted to just take a peek at a couple things, and I made a few notes here, looking at the nations in Scripture. And many of you know, looking at the book of Ezekiel, which was written some 2,500 years ago, and the specificity of what was laid out and what we see today in terms of, 36 and 37 and Israel coming back to the land and the dry bones coming to life. And then 38 and 39 lays out what many know as the War of Gog of Magog. And here, directly to the north, it says that Russia, led by a conglomeration of nations, will invade Israel. And we see that conglomeration of nations forming alliances today, sitting on the northern border of Israel and Syria. You see the 3 of the main principal nations are Russia, Turkey, and Iran. They're on the border. Their militaries are in Syria today. You have Iran and Hezbollah on Lebanon, on closer to the Mediterranean, but again on the border. And we've seen many battles and what could be beginnings of wars over these past 4 to 6 weeks, and the rhetoric that's been ramping up and the loss of life. It's been alarming, to say the least. But I say all that because that's exactly what Jesus said would happen. And we're seeing this today. And the other, I should say, aside from Russia, all of the other nations that are lining up, and there's some, and we're going to talk about a specific headline that came out just a couple of weeks ago on the African coast of another nation, and that lines up with what Ezekiel laid out. And I'll show you this, again, taken straight from the headlines. But they're all anti-Semitic. So most of them have, and not necessarily the people of the land, but the governing bodies have a hatred towards Israel, where many of you have heard Iran and the rhetoric there that they want to remove Israel and the Zionists from the face of the map. So all of these nations that are aligning with Russia and Iran and Turkey, they're anti-Semitic. They have a religious end time eschatology, what's called the Shia Muslims. I don't want to get into a lot of that, but you have the two distinctions between Sunni and Shia. But that Shia eschatology, which is where Iran and many of the other nations fall, they believe they need to drive this chaos and they need to lead the war. They basically believe that they need to lead us into a global war. So that falls in line with some of the goals of, say, Russia. May not be that religious bent that they're looking at, but nonetheless, they're all forming together. And what I'm getting at is the prophecies that we've seen from 2,500 years ago, and then you put on top of that that Israel is in the land today, that that miracle of coming back not once but twice, just exactly as the Bible laid out, and now all these events that are surrounding it, they're happening in front of us. So, Ezekiel lays out from 36 to 39, Israel is front and center. That's what we see, and we'll look at some of the headlines there. As a matter of fact, the entire world right now is fixated on Israel. They're fixated on the Temple Mount. And so much of the battles, and I'm here in America, and we don't necessarily see in a lot of our American news media, it's there, and that's why I do a lot of this too, is to kind of take a peek around the world at what's going on. I would also say that every Old Testament prophet, both minor and major, aside from Jonah, prophesied about the return of Jesus and much of these events. So for the end times to happen, what is laid out in the book of Revelation, Israel must be in the land. Israel must be the focal point, and that's exactly what we see today. So, on top of that, you have wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, and people will say in the past, well, we've seen all this before, but it's escalating. The frequencies of what these occurrences are developing, and you compound that Israel is in the land. So, if you said some of these things in the 1800s or the 1700s or early 20th century, you couldn't say that Israel was in the land, but now they are established again. And again, we've seen Ezekiel 36 and 37 come to pass, which means 38 and 39 is around the corner. And then, if we're going to see the things that will happen as in Revelation, globalism, the push for globalism is here. It's on our doorstep. You see it everywhere, and we'll talk about that. The pandemic crisis that we saw pushed the world towards globalism. The world was speaking the same language. So yes, I'm kind of hinting at the Tower of Babel, but the world was moving in concert in terms of their regulations, their stipulations, how they were treating it, what information they would allow to get out, and they were censoring a lot of it. The push for climate change all around the world, which is basically a push for control, and then you compound that with the fever that I believe is developing with Israel and the Temple Mount. The other thing I just wanted to talk about briefly, and I'm about to do what I think is a startling video in the next week or two concerning AI and what I see in the Bible, potentially, I should say, putting this together. It's a fascinating thing that I've seen recently in the Word that I never saw before. But I wanted to talk about AI, or artificial intelligence, for a second, because it's in the headlines. It's everywhere over the past couple of months. And you see this, how it's pushing, it's replacing humanity. You see the AI chatbot and how now it can write things, or it can pass medical tests, law tests. It can write poetry. It can write novels. It can do whatever it's that we would ascribe it to. And now you see a lot of the people who were at the forefront, the power brokers, the engineers, the scientists that were putting this together, they're sounding the alarm, and they're saying, hey, wait a minute, we're moving too fast, and this thing's going to get away from us. So they're warning, they're sounding the bell. And and I'm looking at this and I'm going, well, this, I believe, and I'll show you this in the next, hopefully the next video, might be 2 videos out, where I'm going to put a lot of this together of what was laid out from Genesis to Revelation concerning artificial intelligence, including the gospel, including specific words from Jesus himself. But then, you have this bioengineering that's going on with the nanobots. It's replacing humanity, and we're going to talk about somebody who mentions this, that you have a human interface with technology. That it's Yuval Harari, part of the World Economic Forum. He's saying you can hack human beings now. They can read our emotions. You can. So AI and a lot of the software capabilities and the facial recognition, things like that, they can actually break down and read emotions. There's surveillance. There's policies in place. There have tests going on where you can limit cities within a 15-mile border, and they'll be able to track you and know where you're going. So think about this now. Today, where you are, you can be tracked with your phone. But now what they're talking about, and it's right around the corner, they can track you with your body. So no matter whether, wherever you are, I happen to be in New York in the United States, but if somebody wanted to track me in through this technology, the technology is there where I can be seen in Moscow, in Beijing, and wherever, in London, Brussels, it doesn't matter. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, why this is so much at the forefront. Do we see this in Scripture? So that's part of my drive. And I'm saying all this because these are the headlines. These are what we're seeing. This is what what was foretold. And in the end, if you think about it, there will be an antichrist with a regime that will want to be able to trace and track you. They'll want to be able to control your economics. They'll want to be able to say, to see whether you will worship the false god, whether you will take the mark of the beast. So all of these things are around us, which is why I do this, which is why I dig into the headlines. So on that note, let me just begin. So let me give you just kind of my montage of images that I like to do at the beginning of these things you see the G7 summit, it was just concluded, Western leaders, and then you had Zelensky from the Ukraine visiting them, really appealing to them for money and for arms. Tucker Carlson was unceremoniously, I'll say, let go by Fox News. And, why would you mention that as far as prophecy is concerned? And it may not be prophetic, but it is a censoring of voices. And, for those who don't know, Tucker is a Christian. So he's certainly taken an enormous amount of risk in getting a lot of the information out there. He was given the January 6th footage, which did not take kindly from many in Washington. And then Fox was sued by, I forget the name of the company, the voting machine company. And I believe it was on a Friday they resolved the case, and on Monday Carlson was let go, not even given any kind of notice. We had the Durham report come out, which was basically verifying what anybody with an ounce of common sense would know. This whole thing that the government has been put on for many years now is a complete sham. And again, I say this because it's a move for power. It's a move for moving us into a global alliance, us meaning America. I'm an American. So it's a push for that. And they do it in very unscrupulous and nefarious manners. I'll call it that. We see the I'll go back to the video. We see the I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of it. It's a type of nerve gas that appeared in Syria in the labs. Whistleblowers in America coming forth describing how a lot of these things that was released in the Durham report, how the FBI whistleblowers, these are men and women who wanted to tell the truth, how information was being blocked in order to obtain power, in order to obtain political election victories. And these people were punished. So these are people, many of these, that I show here in the sign, they served in the war. They served in Afghanistan. They served in Iraq. They came back. These are well-trained military leaders, went to serve our nation, serve in government, serve in the FBI, and they were chastised. Their money was taken from them. They were told to move across the country. These are, men and women with children, their family members, and probably most of them look to be in their 40s. And because they had the gumption to speak out, they were attacked by the American government. And it is what it is, and that doesn't sound it doesn't sound it may not fly to a lot of people, but these are what's coming out of the news. This is the information. This is the focal point of what we see. Then with Israel, as I mentioned, the importance of that and how the wars and the battles and the rockets coming from Gaza, it's very, very difficult time. So if you think about Ukraine, if you think about the unrest and the deterioration, of America and what we see in the Middle East and in Far East and Europe, and I look at it as the world potentially is a powder keg where anything can tick it off and get it going. So as I like to do, I start with Israel, and I mention the battles that are going on there. The battle against Netanyahu, who was elected in December, and we'll get into a little bit of that. I show you on the upper right, I thought this was pretty cool, as Israel celebrated its 75th anniversary. There was some images of American flags because of the importance of America with them. But then, you see the unrest of what's going on in Gaza, and then I'm going to get into the political end of it. Here on this video, I show you over 1,200 rockets were fired. And then there was an Operation Shield and Arrow. And actually, this was very interesting because it appeared as they were firing these rockets. And what happened was, and I'll show you in a second, there was political unrest because of what Netanyahu was doing or was trying to take into effect with the judicial system. And many believe that Israel's enemies saw this as an opportunity to attack. And what happened was they attacked, and Israel did not respond initially, and they were basically lured into a false peace treaty or peace negotiations with Egypt. And what happened was the Israeli Defense Force that lured the terrorist leaders out of Gaza, out of their homes. They were saying goodbye to their families, and this was anticipated. And 3 of the top commandos were taken out simultaneously at different parts of Gaza in their homes at the exact same time. So that's how meticulous and credible their intelligence is. And in some of these buildings, they were able to put rockets flying in specifically to the floor of the apartment of where these leaders were. So this was called Operation Shield and Arrow. So they killed many of their leaders. So it's kind of the old adage where if you want to kill the snake, you chop the head, and that's what I believe is where Israel went. But again, I just want to show you on the video, what's happening in those surrounding areas, and if you look at Lebanon and Syria, and how, as we said before, many of the militaries are down there. They're looking to claim it. Then on the left-hand side, I show you the map of Gaza and some of the critical key military points and cities that are there, and also showing you the proximity of Tel Aviv on the Mediterranean coast there, with Gaza. And Gaza is attempting to get to Tel Aviv as well as the Iranians. So this has all been happening over the last 4 to 6 weeks, and a lot of it always happens too in April. Here I am sitting at the end of May. Because that is a time of Ramadan, it is a time of what the Christians call Easter or Resurrection Sunday and Passover. So your high Jewish holidays, Christian holidays, Muslim holidays, and inevitably, it causes a lot of unrest. So I want to just go back to, and I've mentioned this several times in these headline prophecies of what Israel was going through and the attack on Netanyahu. He's trying to basically get term limits and stipulations to the appointing of judges. And so what I believe is this globalist push, this organized push, went on the attack, and it was interesting because you had at one point upwards of 100,000 protesters in Tel Aviv and some of the other major cities. And I've always said this, and I believe the way that the left attacked 45 in America, I see parallels here. And we know if you go back to 44, he went after Netanyahu in his elections, tried to have him removed from office. But I want to show you on video something that I caught that was interesting in their protests. In the upper left-hand corner, you see the protests that are going on, and the men and women who are dressed in these handmade tails, Hannah's tails. And that's exactly what you saw. That little photograph on the right of that is America's protest against the Supreme Court. And then you see the same dress in Israel. So to me, it's that same pattern, it's the same methods, it's the same procedures. And you know, this is just my opinion. I believe it's the same forces behind it. Then you had Yair Lapid, who is, you know, leading a lot of this unrest. He's the former prime minister. He's very, very left-leaning. And he was really pushing this. But what was interesting to me was the response from many of the Israeli citizens and the conservatives. They came out in droves just a couple of weeks ago supporting Israel, supporting what Netanyahu did. And Netanyahu put this on the side burner, he said, I'm not going to address this now. There's too much turmoil in the nation, and he didn't want to put the nation through it. The other thing that I wanted to point out was here you had 46 in America putting pressure on Netanyahu, actually saying to him, they cannot continue, meaning their government, they cannot continue to go down this road. So here you have 46 lecturing Netanyahu in Israel on what their judicial reforms. So that would be like Israel or another nation coming and saying, you can't do this or you can do that with the Supreme Court or your judicial systems. So, and then if you think about how, you know, the left is trying to pack the courts and change the way term limits, you know, it's talking two sides of your mouth. But, you know, it's important to recognize that America's not giving them the support and they're putting pressure on it. As a matter of fact, you know, 46 will not have or has not had extended an invitation for Netanyahu to come to America. Here's one of our greatest allies, a most important ally clearly in the Middle East, and he refuses to have him in. And if you think about the relationship with 44 and Netanyahu and 46, you know, it looks like it's coming down that same road. You know, again, lecturing them, telling them what they can do, and they can't come in. And I will say, I believe, I've heard rumblings anyway, that the Republicans are looking to invite Netanyahu over, which would be similar to what we saw in the past. Staying with Israel just for a second, you have something that many of, I'll just put it this way, many of the Muslim nations or the Muslims who were against Israel would refer to Israel's independence, May 14th, 1948, as Nakba, which is it's a day of condemnation. It's called it refers to the word catastrophe. So Nakba means global or catastrophe. So in other words, those Muslims treat the independence and the declaration of Israel as a nation as Nakba. And you had Abbas calling the world's bodies, you know, asking the UN to call it Nakba. So here you imagine that, all of these governing nations, but yet we're going to circle Israel, which is why I say Israel's the focal point of prophecy. And here you see the world coming against it in the world courts, if you think of the UN that way. But then you have America, and you have one of the what's called the more progressive-leaning members of Congress, Rashid Tlaib. I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. She was trying to host Nakba, an event specifically in the United States Congress. and the Speaker of the House, McCarthy, turned her down. And matter of fact, they did a day of celebration for Israel's independence. But then Bernie Sanders, this senator from Vermont, and many who believe is pulling a lot of the policies and strings in the government today, he came out and supported her and helped her have that celebration. And not a lot of people went, but people did go. But here, in other words, he gave it credibility with her in the United States Congress, calling it, the creation of the state of Israel a catastrophe. In Lebanon, the former foreign minister visited the border where you could see it. So where you could see him pointing to Israel, it was that close. He came and visited. Then you have, again, I'm going to go back to the formation of these nations and alliances. Here on the lower right, you see the president of Iran with the President Erdogan, who just less than 24 hours after several elections was reelected, and then Vladimir Putin, the conglomeration of the different parties or factions of terrorism, and then Iran going to Syria, to the president of Syria, and reinforcing that alliance, and really because he was on the verge, if you remember, many years ago, not many, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, when Russia came in to try to stabilize the ISIS movement, what was happening in Syria. So they provided that assistance, and Iran is basically, in my estimation, calling their cards in, saying, we helped you, we supported you, and now we need more doors open to funnel their arms and supplies and military and into Syria, again for the purpose of getting to Israel. Then you had another astounding deal that happened, and this is bringing China into the foreplay. China is leading a lot of the developments that's happening on a global level. They are clearly moving closer and closer towards becoming the world superpower. So they were able to forge an alliance between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which has been vehement enemies with one another and causing much, much unrest. They were at war. There's battles. There was, bombs that were sent between the countries just in the last year. And then you have that divide of Sunni and Shia. So here you have Saudi Arabia, which many consider to be the leader of the Muslim religion, and then Iran is vying for their position. So China forged this peace agreement. And, a lot of it positions China into a point of strength geographically, economically, trade-wise, with both. They've had it with Iran. They forged a $465 billion deal, I believe, last year for exchange of energy and fuel for the development and construction of companies, I'm sure scientific agreements. And now you have China moving in and forming an alliance with Saudi Arabia. So this next image that I'm going to show you is really Xi Jinping, the premier, and really kind of appointed himself as the leader for life, meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia on the right, with Vladimir Putin on the left, with President Rouhani of Iran, and then the foreign minister of China forming the alliances with the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia and Iran. So that's China spreading its influence around the world. And then they're coming to the defense of Russia. Matter of fact, let me just jump ahead 1 second. So in March, Xi Jinping, arrived for a state visit to Russia, which was basically telling the world we're supporting Vladimir Putin. We're supporting what's going on there in the invasion in Ukraine, and they are trying to say, we'll form an alliance, we'll form peace. They just put a proposal last week on the table that if you accept the territories, which is mainly along the eastern region of Ukraine, that Russia now occupies, if you being the West recognize it, if Ukraine recognizes it, then there will be a peace treaty, which, the Ukrainians, and, no surprise there, they're not going to recognize it. Then you had something else that happened This was about a month ago, and it was interesting because there was an explosion directly over the Kremlin, and many now believe that might have been staged by Russia in order to attract attention because as soon as it happened, and it was so well photographed, the video was just captured, so precisely, so people wondered. And then what happened immediately, the Russian media and the foreign minister, came out and said that's an attempt on the life of Vladimir Putin. So, again, you're really you're getting powder keg moments where anything can happen, anything can trigger it. So staying with Russia, but now and Israel and Ezekiel, there was a development just a few weeks ago where you had the Sudan, where there's a war now that was started a couple of weeks ago, and different from the governing factions to some of the what I'll call them terrorists or the opposition in Sudan. But what was very, very interesting is Russia, just days before they attacked the government, there was aerial photographs, and I'll show you one here on the lower right of Russian military planes moving in before they invaded or attacked the government. And Putin and the foreign minister came out in support for it. And so again, what I find interesting here is if you look at Ezekiel 38:5, Persia, Cush, and Put will be put with them, all with shields and helmets. So they're part of the North African alliance, Persia being still Middle East, but Cush and Put, which is Ethiopia. But Cush is modern-day Sudan. Put is Libya. I apologize. So Cush is modern-day Sudan. Now, in Libya, there are Russian troops there right now. Many people know that we left a good part of that country. We, again, America. So I find this interesting, where Russia is forming with Cush or the Sudan, and their military is now in there. So you have military presence in Libya and Sudan, which is outlined in Ezekiel 38. And they're also moving in to mine the areas. So there's a great deal of untapped mineral resources in there, gold as well as other minerals. So from an economic standpoint, where Russia has expended a lot of its strength in the markets and purchasing military equipment and trade agreements, their economy is they've got to make up for it. So in other words, they've got financial agreements, they can get around a lot of the sanctions, but they're still looking for methods or means to tap into economic favor or economic riches, and you can find that in many of the in the lands around it. And matter of fact, that's so true for the case for Afghanistan. Afghanistan is littered with mines and minerals and resources, and just so much, which is why China went right in, as well as Russia, after the Americans left. Switch gears for a second, but staying with China and the move to BRICS. So BRICS is an alliance that's forming a digital currency. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So here you have the president of Brazil, who many feel was illegally or unscrupulously elected. I'll put it that way. He is a socialist. I would say he's a Marxist, really. So anyway, you see him now with China, and he's moved over there. And Brazil is the largest economy in South America. So Russia's now spearheading the developments of a new currency. It is used to be the cross-border trade by the BRICS nations, which I mentioned. So Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, chimed in every night. He said he asked himself why all the countries have to base their trade on the American dollar. As one economist put it, Europe is a museum, Japan is a nursing home, and China is a jail. He's not wrong, but a BRICS issue currency would be different. It'd be like a new union of up and coming discontents who are on the scale of GDP now collectively outweigh not only the reigning hegemon, which is the United States, but the entire G7 together. So where I open this, I showed in the montage of images with the G7 alliances and Zelensky coming as part of the Ukraine to ask for support. China, Russia, India's, that's another nation it's interesting because several years ago they were strongly aligned with us and they're still part of the G7, but there's some interesting trade agreements that they have going on now with China because they were at war for a while. So all of this is developing, and it also goes back to the digital currency. If you take the G7 and BRICS, for instance, and if you look at the 10 toes of Daniel, and those are probably could be countries, more than likely kings, and what I believe, and many others do, that is the pointing towards the East and the West. And I would say your conglomerations of nations in the G7, and is the West, and potentially BRICS. You could be looking at the East, and those alliances are forming. But there's two legs, there's two distinctions, and I believe this is what we're seeing. And then naturally the digital currency has to be in place during the tribulation, and it's all moving towards it. And I've talked about it before. I recorded a video several months back called "Economic Headwinds Are Blowing Towards the Word of God," and that is certainly the case. And much of it is based upon the takedown of the U.S. dollar, which is really what a lot of these nations and push towards global government wants is you need to bring the U.S. down to a level playing field, or that's what they want anyway. I wanted to just show you a quick map because much of what we've seen with China and their push to take Taiwan, they're saying it's part of their country. And if you look at the map, just how close that is, and we saw what China did to Hong Kong, but if you look at the Philippines, you look at Japan, you look at South Korea, the proximity there, and then you could go further out towards the South Pacific and Australia, New Zealand. And that's how close we are to a potential war again, where if the United States comes in and some of their support, possibly the Philippines, certainly Japan, South Korea, and then, Australia, maybe New Zealand, that is how quick things can happen. And China has been showing over the past couple of months. Matter of fact, their government about a month ago released a video showing on graphics or an animation of what the invasion would look like from a missile standpoint of how it would surround the nation of Taiwan, both from all four corners, north, west, south, and east. So you can imagine, the proximity of the Taiwanese and seeing this video put out, and it's running across their television stations. So, again, the volatility of the world. Macron, I'm pointing him out, president of France, because he tried to, or is it attempting to, and I believe he might have done it, increase the age of Social Security, which, people went ballistic for because, they're trying to take him down. And shortly after that, the reason I wanted to bring Macron in is they are traditionally supposed to be friends of the West. And he went on a visit to China to supposedly try to broker some peace as far as Ukraine through China. And then afterwards, that didn't happen naturally, but then afterwards, Macron kind of came out and said to the Europeans, made a speech anyway, saying we cannot get caught up in any war with the United States and China and Taiwan. That's none of our business. So again, the influence of Xi Jinping and China to Europe, That's happening. Uh, then you had going back to America now in the legal system. You had a report come out from Durham, which many people know now, saying how the whole RussiaGate thing was just, a farce. And again, people knew this. The media did not report it. I'll put it that way. They went after 45. And I pointed out earlier how they're going after FBI agents and others for holding this information. And it's all about power. And so it's the massive, massive amount of corruption that we are experiencing in Washington. And, it's here at our doorstep. And they're pushing policies that are, that are anti-Christian. And matter of fact, there was a report came out the other day that X amount of dollars are being focused towards different programs that go after the Christian churches and the Catholics. We've seen FBI agents go after pro-life Catholics. Again, showing up at their doors with guns and for a family. This was for a father who was, and I don't know specifically what he was, in terms of whether he was bothering people or not. And he may or may not have. I don't know. But he supposedly said, I'll come in if you want me to come in. And so the show of force, I guess, was way off the charts. But I wanted to talk about, as I wind this down, the pastor's recognition of the times. And I wanted to talk about the church and pastors for a few minutes because, many people within the church, I've cited this study recently where only 25% of the churches view the world from the Bible from a worldview, which is part of the reason that I do this, is kind of bring some of this information out. And, in looking at this, I'm troubled, and I see this in churches where they're like, oh, we don't want to go into politics. We stay away from that. And, here, we sit 3 years, and then it took almost 3 years from a plague that was started, in the Far East. And we know that a lot of the funding was done by the West and the U.S. It put our kids out of school. It shut down churches. You now have a border that is wide open, that fentanyl is pouring in, is killing people. You have sex trades going on the southern border. It's obviously intentional. It's intended to bring so many things down, and the chaos and the evil. But yet the pastors, oh no, we don't want to talk about that. How do you turn your eye towards what's happening there? They're jailing pastors, or even in Europe, in England, if you're caught silently praying by an abortion agency, they can arrest you. They will keep the strip clubs open. They'll keep the bars open, the liquor stores open. They'll keep the marijuana stores open. But they want to shut you down. They want to shut this is what happened. It's not happening right now. But we went through a couple of years of that. And the church was deemed not essential. And then when you had the laws passed about abortion and the outrage and just the massive, massive push. And I will say, thousands and thousands of babies are now alive because of, what happened. And, there's still a push for abortion. You can get an abortion in this country. It's not a problem. You can, certain states, but there's a fight going on. And I guess my point is, as children are dying, as so much is happening to our kids and the sexualization of our kids and the attack on the child's anatomy, how the church can say they don't want to get involved in politics. And this is my opinion. I'm not obviously a pastor or minister, but I find it troubling that they will not acknowledge what's happening in the world. And certainly you want to preach the gospel, but Jesus went after the government. Jesus, I remember in the gospel where Herod went after Jesus, and Jesus said, you tell that fox that I'm paraphrasing, but I will continue to lay hands on the sick until my time has come, which I think was 2 or 3 days from there. So we've had that, and if you want to know about Jesus and politics, look up the Herodian dynasty and the different Herods for 160 years of generations of Herods. So that's where, I think it's a little troubling, and you don't necessarily. I'm not saying you need to preach this from the pulpit, and you can mention it at the pulpit, sure, or you can have maybe some areas to address this. And this is just, again, it's my opinion, but many are saying this, and many are looking to churches online through pastors and ministers who will acknowledge this. And then I remember when 45 came out and he went in front of, I think it's St. John's Church, with a Bible in his hand. This was after he said during the pandemic that churches are essential. And, there were churches who were going against him. And here's somebody who's trying to stick up for the church, whether you like him or not, I don't care. And he's certainly not necessarily my cup of tea the way he conducts himself from a personality, but his policies were certainly to be recognized, and certainly the most favorable in terms of biblical or Christian policies, without question. You can combine all your presidents, and he did more for them than that. Then I wanted to talk about a decline in confidence in pastoral. So there was a recent pastoral confidence, I should say. There was a recent study by the Barna Group that discovered American pastors' confidence in their ministry calling has sharply declined. It showed that only 58% of pastors strongly agreed that they feel called to full-time ministry, compared to 87% in 1992. An astonishing 25% said they lost confidence in their calling since they started in ministry. So, I've left other things up here, but I did, I wanted to basically call out or cite this scripturally, where we're living in a time of extreme anxiety. Leading up to the end times, Jesus said men's hearts would be falling them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Fear is the opposite of faith, and we are experiencing a worldwide shift towards apostasy and biblical morality. The decline of confidence is connected to the decline of faith. Barna wrote, "Things are bleak, and it's an obvious sign that we are nearing the rapture." Let's join in praying for some of these pastors as they continue to minister to a world that needs the message of Jesus. And this is me. I say amen and amen. We need to be praying for our pastors. We need to be praying for our church leaders, for our elders, for the different areas of ministry, whether it's missions or youth or children's ministry. And all of them, we need to be. We need to be praying for them. They have a tremendous amount of pressure on them, and they have people coming at them, I would say, from many, many different angles. And I'm thinking more of a couple of years ago, where you had a lot of the movements and the riots in the streets that divided some churches, and some churches fell because of it. And the push for BLM into the church, and there were some churches that went along with it, and some that stayed the course, and centered and focused on the gospel. So I just say all that because keep your pastors and your ministers in prayer. Do be willing to do whatever you can for them. Then, as I'm winding this down, there is a World Health Organization. This was attempted last year, that they want to turn over the policies to the World Health Organizations on a global body. So, in other words, if another pandemic happens, the sovereignty of the United States and America will not be applied. It will be what dictates or mandates would come from the World Health Organization. 46 is pushing for this. I'm going to show you Michelle Bachmann, who has been leading a great deal of the charge. If my video would cut. There we go. So they're attempting this again this month, and this is the last day of May, so I haven't heard whether this went through or not. I believe only a small minority can block it, and that's what happened last year. So she has been leading the charge to get different churches and pastors praying against this. And again, you don't want to lose your own governing authority. Apostasy in the church. I wanted to call for a cite to Catholic nuns. They called for the full inclusion of the LGBT community on Transgender Day of Visibility. So this is a coalition of Catholic nuns that released a statement supporting Transgender Visibility Day in an effort to celebrate, acknowledge, and uplift the community. The Sisters of St. Joseph U.S. Federation, the Providence of St. Mary of the Woods, and Indiana Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth released a statement on March 31st with dozens of other Catholic and religious groups representing 6,000 vowed Catholic partners in 18 states. The statement titled Solidarity Vowed Catholic Religious Honor Trans Day of Visibility to celebrate, acknowledge, and uplift the trans community while noting the Church's commitment to go beyond a single day. They said, as members of the body of Christ, we cannot be whole without the inclusion of transgender, non-binary, and gender-expansive individuals. At this moment in the United States, transgender people are experiencing harm and erasure. So Jesus loves everybody. We all know that, but there is a massive, massive push, and this is where I would say you're getting some religious groups kowtowing to the pressures of the movement, and you're twisting Scripture. You know, there's just you're taking Scripture and you're twisting it. So, you know, this is part of what I believe when Paul was talking about the apostasy that we'll see in the church and around the world in the end times. I think that's just, you know, another sign of it. Yuval Harari, I wanted to, as I close this out, about AI, we talked about that in the very beginning. He is saying that AI could now attract worshipers, and it could create a new religion. So it's got that capability, and I just, you know, I think of Revelation, and I think of, you know, what will happen, especially when you get to the middle of Revelation and the advent of the false religion. So, you know, I see this as another sign where he said that we can create religious texts, we can inspire new cults through AI by getting this information out there. So he's looking for people to worship and to honor this false image, which is digital technology. Then I wanted to close with few other things here. SatanCon. So here you have these different festivals and street festivals, and you have it for different Hollywood franchises. Star Trek, comes to mind as one of them, and there are others out there. Star Wars, and you see this, but now you have these cults coming together, these Satan worshipers, satanic churches. They gathered in Boston, I believe, in late March or April. And again, they're many of them are serious about it. They worship Satan. They see Satan as the ends to meet the ends, the judge to meet all ends, I should say. And the demonic activity that comes with this and the influence, and we see this in our culture. We've seen this lately on some entertainment programs and the music awards and the Grammys. But it's right there in our streets. It's right, Boston, Massachusetts, one of the foundational areas of our country. And here you see this person in the right where he's got this, what I would call a mock bishop hat on and the cross upside down, and you see the satanic horns and just the people, coming and the city welcoming them. Then you have a movie that came out that I thought was interesting. I haven't seen it yet. I'm looking to get it, Nefarious, where it's a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I'm not sure which, has this dialogue throughout the movie with a person who's been imprisoned who is demonically possessed, and they talk about everything that's going on in the world and in the United States today and how it has been influenced. The policies of what we're seeing is influenced by the devil and demons and whatnot. And I just wanted to point some things out of reviews. The film does a marvelous job at capturing the ongoing fight between man, who is created in the image and the likeness of God, and the demons who want nothing else but to ruin that very image by dragging the soul to hell. They achieved incredible patience by introducing the creature to small temptations once commented to through the experimentation with Ouija boards and the like leads to more demonic activity in one's life, and the doors have been flung open. I've often said this. When you come with Ouija boards and tarot cards and palm readings and things like that, you're opening yourself up, and Bible's filled with examples of this, to demonic activity. With all this said, there is no glorification of evil, but a profound realization that God is in control, and as was admitted in the script when the demons say, we have to go through a series of yeses before we enter, referring to the allowance of God. Phenomenal script, actors, and set that left my family and pale. Not fear but from the bone-chilling reality of how this was well produced, leaving one to think, what doors have I shut, or ways that I am still letting the devil in? So, I've been saying this on a couple of these past presentations where I've seen the rise of Christian filmmaking, Christians getting in the arts, and most recently the Jesus Revolution, The Chosen, and other ventures. And here it's a different twist. And again, I haven't seen it, but all the reviews have been phenomenal, and it's made a lot of money. So, I'm just curious because I like to see this as, the church and others fighting back. And I wanted to end on that positive note of how I feel, or how I see so much of the youth. And we've seen the outpouring of the gospel message and revival going across college campuses. And we saw this in Kentucky and how it's been leading to other campuses. And I wanted to point out two gentlemen here on the screen before I close. They are Oklahoma University seniors Josh Robinson and Nathan Wong. They posed near where the Chance Rapper concert. And long story short, they had a dream and a vision. I think one of them said, he was just spending time as he knew he was near the end of his college schooling. What am I going to do, Lord? What would you have me do? And he said he just felt compelled to start this gathering into Oklahoma University Stadium. And he reached out to his friend, and they got behind it, and they drove it, and they had, different musicians and concert there. But it was all about worshiping and glorifying Jesus and spreading the gospel. And their vision was to get 80,000 people into the stadium. And, the response was tremendous. And they fell short. But they got 30,000 people to come to a night of worshiping Jesus. And I'm so encouraged by that, and what I see there's a feeling, and I've certainly been guilty of it, that we're not going to do well with a lot of what's going on in the culture today and the youth. But I'm so encouraged by so many youth that I see across the country, and it's not going to be a move that man can create. It's a move by Holy Spirit, but it's a hunger for the kids, for the young, for Generation Z and Generation X. They want the truth. They don't want watered down. Let's appeal to the culture. Let's dance around the gospel. I firmly believe we need to get the gospel out there, get the information out there, look around the world, meet them where they need to be met. I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by these kids. So I wanted to point this out as something that I saw this spring that gave me great delight and hope. So on that note, I just wanted to close and say thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I'm sorry this was a little late in getting out there, but there's going to be more very quickly. I've got a number of videos that I'm working on and some startling information. Again, I have something on AI and the times that we live in, and there's a couple of other things too. So any questions, comments, suggestions, prayer requests, please email russickoutlook@gmail.com. Happy to take it on. God bless you. Hope to see you again. Take care. Bye-bye. Oh, you've been listening to the Russick Outlook. And remember, as always, just my opinion.